Welcome to Mystery and Murder, analysis by Dr. Phil, where we dig into the darkest corners of the human psyche. From twisted motives to chilling behaviors, we break down what drives people to commit unthinkable crimes. These are the cases that stay with you, haunting, baffling, and often defying all logic. Be sure to subscribe. New episodes drop regularly on all podcast platforms and YouTube. Now, during our last episode, we peeled back the layers of the Murdaugh dynasty, a family once seen as part of society's upper echelon, certainly in South Carolina. But the Murdaugh legacy was about to implode as 22-year-old Paul Murdaugh awaited trial for his role in a fatal boat crash that killed Mallory Beach. He and his mother, Maggie, were found savagely gunned down on the family estate. Then came the twist. No one saw this coming. Alec Murdaugh, the powerful family patriarch, was arrested not only for decades of fraud, but for the cold-blooded murder of his own wife and son. But the fight for law enforcement to put Murdaugh behind bars was nowhere near over. There was real concern leading up to Alec Murdaugh's trial that his family's influence in the Lowcountry could sway the jury. After all, the Murdaughs had held power in that region for nearly a century. During jury selection, many potential jurors were dismissed for having personal connections to the family or strong opinions about the case. Even Judge Clifton Newman admitted finding an impartial jury in that town was no easy task. There was a heightened sense of uncertainty surrounding the trial's possible outcome. Despite the evidence, many people weren't sure which way the verdict would fall. The judge ordered the removal of a portrait of Alec's grandfather, Randolph Buster Murdaugh Jr., a former scholar whose image had long presided over the courtroom. Just like the Murdaugh name, the portrait came down, an effort to strip the room of any lingering influence from the family's powerful legacy and ensure, as best they could, a fair trial. But legacies run deep, particularly in that part of the country. It was January 23, 2023, when the proceedings officially began. From the start, it was clear that this trial wasn't just about two lives lost. Tragic as that may have been, it was about the shocking unraveling of a man and a family legacy that was now continuing in real time. News trucks lined the streets. Reporters jostled for space outside the Colleton County Courthouse. Social media lit up with speculation, and armchair detectives weighed in on every move. It's not every day you see a case this complex with a figure as polarizing as Alec Murdaugh at its center. The prosecution, well, they came out swinging. Lead attorney Creighton Waters painted Alec Murdaugh as a manipulative man, so cornered by his lies and mounting financial ruin that he executed his own wife and son in cold blood. The state leaned heavily on circumstantial evidence, damning financial records, and that cell phone video, the one that placed Alec at the murder scene just moments before the killings, despite his repeated claims to the contrary. This man was no grieving husband, no grieving father, the prosecution alleged. He was the not-so-criminal mastermind behind the brutal slayings and cover-up. But the defense, led by Dick Harpootlian, pushed back with equal force. He painted Alec as a heartbroken man, reeling from an unimaginable double loss. A flawed investigation, Alec's team argued, had zeroed in on him while overlooking key gaps. There was no murder weapon, no blood on Alec's clothes, no forensic smoking gun. They claimed that Alec's arrest had been the result of a rush to judgment fueled by public pressure and a media frenzy. This was a fascinating trial to watch, with a cast of many characters. But it was simultaneously devastating. One of the most chilling moments came when Dr. Ellen Reamer, the autopsy expert, took the stand, and what she delivered wasn't just testimony. It was a gut punch to everyone listening in that courtroom. She laid bare the gruesome reality of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh's murder and their final moments. Graphic testimony that exposed the true horror of their violent deaths and the destruction inflicted on their bodies. Now, I don't want to make anybody sick. I don't want to get needlessly graphic here, but to appreciate the gravity of what had been done, you do need to understand what took place. Let's talk about Paul Murdaugh. This is the son. Dr. Reamer testified that Paul was shot twice, not once, but twice, with a shotgun. The first blast tore through his chest and arm, causing significant internal injuries. The second shotgun blast entered Paul's left shoulder and neck area, traveled upward into his head, and ultimately blew out the top of his skull. Dr. Reamer described that shot, as you can imagine, to be instantly fatal. Dr. Reamer noted there was no soot or stimpling, which means the shotgun was fired from at least 3 feet away, not at close range. The forensic analysis suggests Paul likely saw his killer in those final moments, but was taken by surprise and had no time to defend himself. Now, to appreciate this, you have to put yourself in Paul's position for a minute. Imagine seeing your father pointing a shotgun towards you, and then he pulls the trigger not once, but twice. This is the man who was there the day you were born. And now he watches as you take your last ragged breath. You have to wonder what sense of confusion, what sense of betrayal, what sense of absolute shock and dismay was going through this young man's thoughts at that time. And then there's Maggie Murdaugh. Maggie was gunned down with a different weapon, a high-powered .300 blackout rifle. Now, it begs the question, why 2 different weapons? The prosecution argued that 2 different guns were used in the murders of Paul and Maggie to make the killings appear as if they were carried out by multiple assailants, potentially throwing off investigators. The first 2 shots struck Maggie's lower body, forcing her to bend or collapse. One traveled upward into her brain as she lay helpless. The final bullet fired in the back of her head. The angle didn't lie. The shooter moved as he fired, closing in with deadly precision. Now, the people in the courtroom, whether they were fans of Murdaugh or not, even though Reamer's testimony was clinical in delivery, certainly not melodramatic, but it shook the room. One juror covered her mouth, visibly disturbed. Alec wept as his family's autopsy photos were shown. But were those tears of grief or a desperate performance from a man on trial for his life? Obviously, the defense has to deal with this, right? So they're pushing back hard. They tried to create doubt, suggesting alternate angles, even a possible close-range shot. But Dr. Reamer never wavered. Her conclusion was firm. These weren't frantic, chaotic killings. Coming up, it takes a certain kind of demented thinking to kill your own family. Most of us have heard of the fight or flight and the freeze reaction, but there's a fourth F.
Fawning is a relational trauma response where we unconsciously appease or caretake in order to lessen the harm.
You silence your own needs just to keep the peace.
Often these patterns, they stem in childhood.
What are some warning signs?
The Dr. Phil Podcast.
I think that is a huge deal. Available on your favorite podcast app. Subscribe and follow. These shots were deliberate and fired from a distance. Look, you're talking about a whole different situation here than any other murder, any other killings that law enforcement ever deals with. You're talking about family annihilators. It takes a certain kind of demented thinking to kill your own family, to shoot your own mate, your own offspring. Family annihilators rarely act out of impulse. It's very seldom that they just jump up and do this in a fit of rage or anger. These murders are often carefully planned, with perps selecting dates, choosing weapons, and crafting misleading narratives. They create alibis. They do all sorts of things because they think this through. They choose their timing. They choose everything with forethought. Firearms are the most frequent weapon of choice, and these killings typically occur in the family home. Many perpetrators die by suicide shortly after the murder, suggesting a final tragic attempt to control the narrative. While many family annihilators do end their own lives, those who choose not to often display traits like narcissism, a desire for control, or a deep-seated fear of death. Their decision to live can reveal as much about their psyche as their decision to kill. Those of you that have followed me for a long time will remember the work that we did here on the case involving Chris Watts, the man who murdered his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters, all to start a new life without the burdens of his old one. It was a chilling act of familicide, driven by selfish desires. And so you ask, well, who does this? I've had so many people over the years, when something tragic like this happens, they'll say to me, what kind of people do this? When people say that to me, it's not rhetorical. They mean, really, who does this? And I can tell you the motivations vary, but it's almost always some form of escape. Specific motivations can include financial collapse. They're trying to escape the burden of digging themselves into a huge hole. Now, Alec feared a looming financial crisis. It was coming, and he knew it. He had millions and millions of dollars in debt, and he had been embezzling from client accounts and rerouting money and misappropriating funds. All of this was unraveling around him, threatening to destroy his carefully crafted image. And there's almost always a sense of grandiosity and entitlement. Alec had long operated with a sense of untouchability, using his influence to bend the rules. I mean, he thought, look, I'm not a lawyer, I'm the lawyer. I'm the one that goes in and handles things for people. I'm the one that goes into court and manipulates the system. And when that power was threatened, he may have felt cornered because his own partners were coming at him and asking questions. You're commingling funds. You're taking awards that were won on behalf of your clients and keeping them for yourself. And people are asking questions. This is all going to come out. Yeah, he may have felt cornered. If he didn't, he truly was a narcissist, because if he thought he could do what he was doing and survive that, he was totally out of touch with reality. So maybe this was all distraction, that he thought he could lash out to protect his name. You think, are these people mentally and emotionally unstable? Well, would a sane person do what these family annihilators do? Now, Alec was never formally diagnosed with erratic behavior or addiction struggles, stress reactions, but it was clear that mounting pressures could have contributed to a distorted sense of reality. And he was clearly isolating himself, clearly, in a sense of desperation, living a double life. He was stealing and embezzling and secreting all of these behaviors. This is all in secret. And this world was closing in, with trusted friends turning away, family members growing distant as these secrets started to be discovered and unraveled. They oftentimes have this twisted sense of protection. In the darkest corners of a desperate mind, he may have convinced himself that ending his family's suffering was a twisted form of mercy, that if he kept them from going through the humiliation that he was bringing down, that he was saving them in some way. I know that sounds unbelievable, but narcissists look at this only from their point of view. He could well have been telling himself, they're going to go through humiliation, they're going to be outcast, they're going to be living with the burden of everything that I've done. I'll save them that suffering. Like, I'll fix this for them. They have no idea what's coming. This is an act of mercy on my part. And they always find a way that they're the victim. Facing exposure and disgrace, Alex may have felt dragged down by the very family he had spent his life trying to protect and elevate. So maybe he thought, look, I've done all this to try to maintain this lifestyle. If it wasn't for them, I'd have never had to do all of this. And so he twists this around in his mind where he resents them. So there's all kinds of distorted thinking, and you pour drugs on top of that. Boy, a lot of bizarre thinking can seem like a good idea at the time. Let's move away from him for a minute and talk briefly about other noteworthy witnesses who testified during this case. Now, Rogan Gibson, Paul's best friend and a critical witness to the prosecution's case, is worth taking a minute to talk about. Gibson told jurors he could clearly hear Alec's voice on a video Paul took at the dog kennels minutes before the murder. A video Alec swore he was not in. Now, his best friend says, oh, it's clearly him, but Alec swore he wasn't in that video, which he had to do because he swore he was not there that day. But that voice, his voice, put him at the crime scene. Then there was Shelley Smith, the caregiver for Alec's ailing mother. She said on the stand that Alec made a surprise visit that night, then came back later, pressuring her to lie about how long he had stayed. She also mentioned him carrying some kind of blue tarp, or maybe a raincoat. That very item was later found covered in gunshot residue. Now, why is that important? There was no blood. There was nothing on his clothing. But she saw him carrying this blue item, and it was covered in gunshot residue. Now, Jeannie Sekiger, the CFO of Alec's former law firm, she explained how Alec had been secretly funneling client settlement funds into a fake account that he created under the name Forge, which he alone controlled. Now, isn't that interesting? Forge. Like forge a signature. She's the one who confronted him about pilfering nearly, get this, $800,000 from his clients. Her testimony became the backbone of the prosecution's theory. Alec wasn't just lying, he was cornered. And when the walls closed in, people died. Family members also took the stand, peeling back the polished veneer of a once powerful dynasty, revealing the family's cracks. Marion Proctor, Maggie's sister, testified about Alec and Maggie's marriage. She admitted that for the most part, they had a good relationship. But it wasn't perfect. Far from it. Years earlier, Maggie had confronted Alec about a suspected affair on his part, a betrayal that left a scar, even though they stayed together. Marion also revealed that Maggie was worried about Alec's opioid use, even nicknaming Paul Little Detective, because he kept an eye on his father's pill habits. I said, all of this bizarre logic, illogic, might seem more reasonable to somebody that was frying their brain with drugs. About a month before the murders, Paul discovered bags of pills in Alec's computer bag. You have to think that must have been a heavy burden for a young 20-something. And let's not forget, Paul allegedly had issues of his own with drinking, and we know that addiction can be considered hereditary. There's a huge hereditary component. And it's not alcohol to alcohol or drugs to drugs. It's the predisposition for an addictive type personality. Dealing with a parent's addiction can create a role reversal where the child becomes a parent, the student becomes a teacher. It's just a complete flip of roles, forcing children into caregiver roles and leading to stress, anxiety, and family dynamics when you have to start parenting your own father. For Paul, trying to monitor his father's opioid use likely added to the emotional toll already weighing on their family. And Alec may have well thought, he knows more than I can afford for him to know, and he may have resented him for holding him to account. You can think of a family system like a wind chime, for example, that's got a lot of different parts to it. When one person in a family begins to change his or her behavior, that change will affect the entire family system. Think about it. You grab one of those chimes, pull it way out and let it go, it starts banging into every other chime that's hanging there. When one part in a hanging mobile or hanging wind chime moves, this affects all parts, but in different ways, and each part has to adjust to try to regain balance. This was a man known as Mr. Fix-It in the family. Alec was the patriarch. He was the provider, the father who always was there to bail Paul out of trouble, even if it meant taking others down. But all of this was a facade Alec used to hide the real him, the drug-addicted lying thief. And his opioid addiction apparently started after knee surgeries in the early 2000s. So think about that. This is across 20 years. And it spiraled into a severe dependency. He claimed to have eventually reached a point of consuming, get this, 60 pills a day, a habit that became increasingly draining and difficult to hide. Now, let's jump back to the testimony of Maggie's sister Marion. What struck her as most strange was Alec's focus after the murders. While the rest of the family fretted that a killer was still on the loose, because remember, 2 different weapons, shotgun and a high-powered rifle, which people theorize Alec used to create the thought that there were multiple assailants. So his top priority still seemed to be clearing Paul's name from the 2019 boat crash. Well, wait a minute. Aren't there people out there trying to kill your family? Marion found that disconnect jarring. Paul was gone. Why was Alec still fixated on clearing his name? Now, I understand a father doesn't want people thinking badly about their deceased son, but what about the fact that there's a killer on the loose targeting your family? And then there was Buster, the surviving Murdaugh son. He took the stand too, for the defense. His fiery hair, a reminder of the signature trait the 3 Murdaugh men once shared, Buster remained loyal to his father, trying to help the man now accused of murdering his mother and little brother. He described Alec as being destroyed, heartbroken over the brutal murders. What kind of position did that put Buster in? What did he really think in his head? His mother and brother have been murdered. His father is standing trial. Nothing will ever be the same for him, no matter what happens. It's got to be a tremendous burden, carrying the weight of a name once synonymous with power, now forever linked to scandal and loss. You have to wonder, why was Buster spared? Well, he wasn't at Moselle that night, but still. However, unlike Paul and Maggie, Buster wasn't directly linked to the scandals threatening Alec's financial empire. Sparing Buster may have been an attempt to preserve Alec's family legacy and secure a potential life insurance payout, as seen in Alec's later failed suicide for hire scheme. Now, I know it's like you've got to have a dance card here. Wife is murdered. Paul is murdered. Buster is spared. Alec has a failed suicide attempt, apparently, which turns out not to be real. There's an insurance policy that could be collected, but who's there to collect it if not for Buster? Just when you thought this trial couldn't get any more like a Southern Gothic tragedy, a name hidden in the shadows, largely long forgotten, emerged. So who would that be? Well, Gloria Satterfield. Gloria had been the loyal family housekeeper for decades. Then one day back in 2018, she suffered a bad fall on the Murdaugh's Moselle estate, allegedly tripping on the front steps. She fell into a coma soon after and never regained consciousness, ultimately passing from traumatic brain injuries and complications. Now, interesting to note, Paul and Maggie were not the first to have suffered a deadly fate on that property. It's incredible that this woman's death had long been glossed over. Understand, Gloria wasn't just a Murdaugh hired hand. By all accounts, she was like a second mother to Paul. The two were incredibly close, and Paul even reportedly carried a photo of her in his wallet, a reminder of their bond. He apparently didn't even carry a photo of his own family, but he had a picture of her. That speaks volumes. Yet when Gloria died, her cause of death was ruled natural. No autopsy, and the true story about the betrayal after her death remained largely secret. But now it was coming to light. Alec, always one for hatching criminal schemes, convinced her sons, Tony and Brian, to sue him for wrongful death since her quote-unquote fall happened on his property. You heard me right. She fell on his property, lapsed into a coma, and ultimately died. Alec goes to her sons, Tony and Brian, and said, "Sue me for wrongful death." Now, why would he do that? Well, I'll tell you. He urged the brothers to hire Corey Fleming, his close friend and former college roommate, as their attorney, promising them he would make sure they were taken care of financially. But behind the scenes, Alec and Corey Fleming had a diabolical plan to divert the settlement funds for their own gain. And if the name Corey Fleming rings a bell, it should. Corey Fleming was the same attorney Alec urged Paul's friend, Connor Cook, to hire after the drunken boat crash in 2019. At the time, Connor thought it was strange that Alec was pushing his own lawyer on him, not realizing the two were in cahoots from the start. And as you might expect, the promises Alec made to Gloria's sons proved to be nothing but a pack of lies. He was no better than a snake oil salesman. Alec and Corey went on to pocket the entire staggering $4.3 million insurance payout. How much went to those boys? Not one single red cent. But justice would have its day. Tony Satterfield took the witness stand during Alec's trial, and after he spoke his truth, Gloria became much more than a tragic footnote, much more than a forgotten death, much more than a method for Alec to get $4.3 million. She served as a symbol to the court of just how far Alec would go to manipulate, deceive, and betray others for his own benefit. Now, needless to say, the circumstances of Gloria Satterfield's death, well, they're certainly suspicious and remain shrouded in mystery. In 2021, SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, reopened the investigation after information came to light during the broader probe into Maggie and Paul's murders. Despite Alec later admitting in court filings that he invented the critical facts surrounding her fatal fall, including the claim that she tripped over the family dogs, to this day, the true circumstances of her death remain a haunting, unresolved chapter in the Murdaugh saga. Now think about that. She is kind of an afterthought. Was she murdered? Was she pushed down those steps? Was she hit in the back of the head and then placed on the step? Who knows what happened? But it hardly makes a headline. $4.3 million were manipulated out of that situation, and not a penny went to her family. They didn't even make the headlines. While the revelations about the stolen Satterfield settlement sent shockwaves through the courtroom, nothing could prepare viewers for the jaw-dropping moment when Alec Murdaugh himself took the stand, facing his accusers and trying to salvage what remained of his tarnished image. Could there be anything left? And if that's the case, what does he have to lose? It was a risky move, but one of his attorneys, Dick Harpootlian, said it was necessary to confront the damning evidence against him, especially the cell phone video that placed him at the scene just moments before the murders. Alec wanted the jury to hear his side directly, hoping to seize control of the narrative and cast doubt on the prosecution's case. Now, again, if we're talking about a narcissist here, and I've never diagnosed him, never met him, never evaluated him, never done any testing, never had the opportunity. I can just tell you if I did, on the short list of considerations I would be looking to verify or eliminate would be narcissistic personality disorder. But a narcissist, they see things through their point of view and no one else's. So they're going to get up and tell their story and be stunned if you don't buy it. Be stunned if you don't believe it. Because they just think, I'm telling you, how could you not believe it? So I believe that he believed that he was actually going to get up there and convince everybody that he was right and they were wrong. He has to deal with these things. And first, the kennel. He admitted he lied about being at the dog kennels. I mean, how could he not? He's on video. You don't see him, but you hear his voice. Paul's best friend says, well, yeah, that's him. So he admitted he lied about being at the dog kennels on the night of the murders. And I mean, how could he not? There's cell phone video that you hear him. He blamed his deception about his whereabouts on what he called his opioid paranoia, revealing a pattern of self-preservation and manipulation. It's kind of like, I lied until you caught me. Now I'll tell you the truth. I just lied because I was paranoid. But nonetheless, you were at the crime scene. Why he lied was important to him, but I don't think it was important to anybody else, just that he lied. He also seesawed between acting remorseful and being defiant, as a narcissist would. It's like, how can you ask me those questions? He admitted to financial fraud, but denied the murders, adamantly maintaining his innocence. Now, let me talk to you about that for a minute. There's something called modified mea culpa. That's when a witness can get on the stand and admit to serious misdeeds, things that you think nobody would ever admit to this. Sometimes a jury will say, wow, he was very honest about that, much to his detriment. He admitted to fraud, stealing from his clients. He destroyed himself on that. So if he's going to admit to all that, why would he lie about these other things? He's destroying himself. Well, why would he tell the truth about that and lie about this? Well, because those things are not actionable. He's not on trial for stealing. He's not on trial for fraud. He's not on trial for misappropriation of funds. He's not on trial for embezzlement. He can admit to every one of those things, and he's not being tried for that. So when the jury gets back in the room, they're not going to be asked, do you find him guilty of fraud? He can admit to every one of those things because he's not being charged with those things. So you can buy credibility by admitting to things that seem like, wow, a witness wouldn't admit to these things, and then lie about something else, unless you understand he's not in danger in this trial for admitting to those misdeeds. So you can buy credibility. Now, does he have to deal with those later? Yeah, but that's another day. Right now, you're fighting for your life. We'll deal with those things later. I can tell you from a trial science standpoint, he was trying to buy credibility by seeming very honest about bad deeds. So people would say, he's going to admit that. Why lie about the other? So I'm going to believe him when he says he didn't do this. And then there's the addiction defense. He admitted to a 20-year opioid addiction, describing it as a crippling dependency that clouded his judgment and caused his erratic behavior. He claimed his addiction led him to rehab in the past, framing it as a root cause of poor decisions and distrust of law enforcement. So if you look at his interviews and say, well, he doesn't seem very honest there, you can say, well, I didn't trust them. I was paranoid. What if they found out I was an opioid addict? Again, modified mea culpa. Then when he cracks under pressure, the prosecution's cross-examination revealed inconsistencies that undermined his credibility and reinforced this narcissistic master manipulator narrative. But this narcissism, and again, I haven't diagnosed him, but I'm just telling you based on what I've seen, limited as it is, I predicted at the time, he's taken the stand. There's no way when you think you're the smartest person in the room, you can sit over there and let other people tell your story. He had to try to control the narrative. He was accustomed to running the trial, not sitting back and being a passenger back in row 12 of the bus and somebody else doing the driving. Couldn't happen. He's too narcissistic for that, too much of a controller for that. Just like his botched insurance fraud scheme where he tried to stage his own death to manipulate the outcome. Taking the stand was just another attempt to seize control of his fate. He just couldn't take no for an answer. He's going to testify. He's going to talk to that jury and win them over and get his way when the stakes are life or death. He's thinking, I'm either going to spend the rest of my life in prison or I'm going to get up there and do the closing argument of my lifetime. I'm going to make them have compassion for me, feel sorry for me, understand why I'm the way I am, and maybe they'll put me in a mental institution until I can manipulate some psychiatrist that I'm better now. He thought he knew how to turn on the emotions and the charm, and he thought that this would all work in his favor. It was layered, it was emotional, he was controlled at times, but he was not reading the room. I think he came across as desperate, and I don't think that he was having the impact on that jury he thought he did. I don't think he was withstanding cross the way he thought he was. And then closing arguments. One last chance to shape the narrative. Prosecutor Creighton Waters, well, he certainly didn't pull any punches. He said this wasn't just a financial storm, it was a hurricane of accountability. He went on to call Alec a family annihilator, a man who chose murder to escape an avalanche of consequences for his crimes. He basically said he used them as a distraction. Look over here, look over here, don't look over here, look over here. And that he was willing to kill his own family to gain sympathy and distract them from what was really going on. Meanwhile, defense attorney Jim Griffin tried to pull the jury back from the edge. His voice cracked as he pleaded, yes, Alec lied, but that doesn't make him a killer, implying there's a big difference between lying and killing. And again, he pointed to the lack of physical evidence, no blood, no weapon, no smoking gun. This is still America, he said. Don't let them make him the face of all your anger. And then just 3 hours later, the verdict. The jury told Alec Murdaugh to rise. The room fell silent. Guilty. He was found guilty of murdering Maggie, guilty of murdering Paul, guilty of using a weapon to commit both crimes. Alec stood still, no tears, no visible shock, just a man who once ruled the courtroom and was now sentenced in it. No family reached for him. No hands on his back. No comforting. Just a faint echo of a legacy destroyed. The Murdaugh name would go down in history, but not for admirable reasons. You would think the story would end with that verdict, but it did not. The very next day, during sentencing, Alec Murdaugh finally spoke. He said, and I quote, "I would never hurt my wife Maggie, and I would never hurt my son Paul." End of quote. It was the same denial he had clung to since the beginning. And then he repeated a phrase he had used earlier on the stand, one that now felt haunting. Quote, "A tangled web we weave." But Judge Clinton Newman, unmoved, looked him in the eye and asked the question everyone was thinking. When will it end? When will it end? It has already ended for the jury because they have concluded that you continued to lie and lie throughout your testimony. Alec got handed 2 life sentences, no parole. The dynasty was now a heap of rubble. Today, Alec sits in a South Carolina prison, just another inmate in an orange jumpsuit, stripped of power and privilege. And yet, even behind bars, Alec maintains his innocence. He still claims he didn't kill Maggie and Paul, and his legal team is still fighting for him, actively appealing his convictions. They cited allegations of jury tampering by former county clerk Becky Hill, who they claim influenced jurors to convict Murdaugh for her own benefit, allegedly to increase the sales of her book, which covers the case. However, even if his murder convictions were to be overturned, Alec Murdaugh would still remain in prison due to a separate 40-year federal sentence for financial crimes. The trappings of the Murdaugh family are long gone. The once grand Moselle property where Maggie and Paul took their final breaths has been sold. The family's possessions, symbols of memories and privilege, were auctioned off to the highest bidders. What's left is a cautionary tale about the harmfulness of unchecked power. A lesson, if you will, in the dangers of one believing they're untouchable. It's a reminder that no matter how infallible you think you are, secrets and lies will eventually catch up to you. Even the mightiest can fall when the truth comes crashing down. Thank you for listening. Make sure to follow and subscribe to Mystery and Murder Analysis by Dr. Phil. You'll find us available on all podcast players and on YouTube. We will continue to dig in to the cases in which you are interested. So long for now.